explanation isn't always clarity. Sometimes it's loss of control. Most people feel the need to explain, justify decisions, defend actions, make sure they're understood. It feels necessary, like silence creates misunderstanding. But the Sigma male sees something different. The more you explain, the more you give others space to question, reinterpret, or challenge your direction. What makes this mindset powerful is that it's not about being distant, it's about being precise. He understands that not everyone needs access to his reasoning. Not every decision requires validation, and not every situation improves with more words. So instead of explaining everything, he lets actions define him, and that creates a presence that feels controlled, not reactive. In this video, we're breaking down why Sigma males rarely explain themselves and how this behavior creates respect, control, and influence without saying more than necessary. If you want to understand Sigma psychology, communication control, and silent authority, subscribe to Silent Wise. And see until the end, because the final insight explains when explaining actually weakens your position. He knows over-explaining reduces perceived confidence. Less said, more believed. Over-explaining signals doubt. He recognizes that every extra word weakens the position he's trying to defend. Most people think clarity comes from saying more, adding detail, repeating points, making sure nothing is misunderstood. But what actually happens is the opposite. The more you explain, the more it looks like you're trying to convince, not decide. And once it feels like convincing, confidence starts fading. As interactions unfold, the pattern becomes obvious. Someone questions him, and instead of defending with long explanations, he answers briefly or not at all. That restraint changes the dynamic immediately. Others expect justification, but they don't get it. And in that absence, something shifts. The conversation loses momentum, the pressure to prove disappears. While others try to fill space with words, he allows silence to hold his position. From that point, perception begins changing. Confidence is not measured by how much you say, it's measured by how little you need to say. When someone speaks briefly and stands by it, it signals certainty. There is no need to expand, no need to repeat. The message is clear because it is controlled, and control creates presence. Over time, this approach strengthens his communication. He doesn't react to every question as if it requires a full explanation. He chooses when to speak and when to remain silent. That choice creates structure. Conversations become sharper, more direct, more intentional. While others lose control through over-explaining, he maintains it through restraint. People often misunderstand this phase. They assume explaining more makes them clearer, but what they don't see is how it affects perception. Too many words create doubt. Too much explanation invites challenge. It opens space for others to question what should already be decided. Eventually, the realization becomes clear. Confidence is not in how much you prove, it's in how little you need to. And once that is understood, over-explaining disappears naturally, replaced by precision and control. He understands not everyone deserves access to his reasoning. Access is earned. Not everyone qualifies. He doesn't expose his thinking to every question, every opinion, every person who asks. Most people assume that if something is questioned, it must be explained. But he sees the flaw. Giving access to your reasoning gives others access to your direction. And not everyone uses that access with alignment. As interactions unfold, the difference becomes visible. When asked why he made a decision, he answers selectively. Sometimes briefly. Sometimes not at all. Others expect full transparency, but they don't receive it. That absence creates tension. Why isn't he explaining more? What is he holding back? But that tension is intentional. He understands that explanation is not always about clarity. It's often about satisfying curiosity that doesn't deserve access. From that point, control becomes stronger. By limiting what he reveals, he protects how he moves. Others cannot influence what they don't fully understand. They cannot question what they don't have access to. That separation creates stability. While others open everything to discussion, he keeps key decisions internal, not out of secrecy, but out of precision. Over time, this boundary becomes consistent. He doesn't feel pressure to justify every action. He doesn't need others to agree to move forward. That independence removes friction. Conversations remain surface level when necessary, deeper only when aligned. The same question can receive different levels of response depending on who asks it. That selectivity protects his direction. People often misunderstand this phase. They assume openness builds trust, but what they don't see is that unrestricted openness also creates vulnerability to unnecessary influence. Not every perspective adds value. Not every question deserves a detailed answer. Eventually, the realization becomes clear. Explanation is not an obligation, it is a choice. And once that choice is controlled, access becomes limited, direction becomes protected, and influence from the outside begins to fade. He trusts his decisions without needing external validation. Trust becomes internal. Approval becomes irrelevant. He stops looking outward to confirm what he already understands. Most people hesitate before acting. They check reactions, seek opinions, measure their decisions against what others might think. It feels safe. It feels responsible. But over time, it creates dependency. And dependency slows direction. He removes that pattern. As situations unfold, the difference becomes clear. A decision is made, and he moves without asking for agreement. No second guessing. No need to explain it to gain approval. Others may question it, may suggest alternatives, may expect him to reconsider. But he doesn't shift, not because he ignores input, but because he already evaluated it before deciding. The process happened internally, not publicly. From that point, clarity strengthens. Without the need for validation, his decisions become faster and more precise. There is no delay caused by waiting for confirmation. There is no confusion created by conflicting opinions. What he chooses is aligned with his direction, not influenced by external noise. That alignment removes hesitation. Over time, this trust compounds. Each decision reinforces the next. Success builds confidence. Mistakes build understanding. Both are processed internally, without needing external interpretation. That process creates stability. He knows he can rely on his judgment because it has been tested repeatedly. That certainty replaces doubt. People often misunderstand this phase. They see independence and assume arrogance, but what they are actually seeing is self-reliance, the ability to move without needing constant reinforcement from others. He doesn't reject feedback, he filters it. And what remains is what aligns. Eventually, the realization becomes clear. Validation is not required to move forward. And once that need is removed, decisions become cleaner, faster, and entirely his. He avoids giving others material to question or manipulate. Information gets controlled. Exposure gets limited. He doesn't give more than necessary because every detail can be used against him. Most people share openly, explaining thoughts, revealing intentions, filling silence with information they think is harmless. But over time, he notices something different. The more you reveal, the more others can question, reinterpret, or use it to influence your direction. And once that pattern becomes clear, he reduces it. As interactions continue, the difference becomes visible. When conversations shift toward personal decisions or future plans, he stays precise. No unnecessary detail, no extended explanation. Others expect more, try to pull information out, but they receive only what is needed. That restraint changes the dynamic. Without full context, others cannot challenge what they don't fully understand. Without details, there is nothing to twist or manipulate. From that point, control becomes stable. He moves without giving others leverage. His words don't create openings for doubt or debate. While others expose their direction and then defend it, he keeps his direction internal and avoids the need to defend anything. That separation protects him from unnecessary influence. Over time, this approach strengthens his position. Conversations remain clear and limited. There is no excess information to manage, no explanations to correct, no misunderstandings to fix. What is said is intentional. What is not said is protected. That balance keeps his communication efficient and controlled. People often misunderstand this phase. They assume openness creates strength. But what they don't see is how easily openness can create vulnerability when it is unrestricted. Not everyone engages with alignment. Some question, some challenge, some manipulate, and without control, information becomes a tool against you. Eventually, the realization becomes clear. Protection is not about silence, it's about precision. And once that precision is applied, others lose the ability to influence through what they no longer have access to. He lets actions communicate more than words ever could. Actions replace explanations. Results speak clearly. He stops trying to define himself through what he says and starts letting what he does create the message. Most people rely on words explaining intentions, describing plans, promising outcomes before they exist. It feels necessary to be understood. But he sees the gap. Words can be questioned, doubted, reinterpreted. Actions cannot. As situations unfold, the difference becomes obvious. Instead of explaining what he will do, he does it. Instead of defending his position, he demonstrates it. Others talk, justify, repeat, but he moves. That movement creates clarity without needing explanation. People don't have to interpret his words because they can see the outcome directly, and that removes confusion. From that point, communication becomes simplified. There is no need to argue, no need to convince, no need to repeat. The action itself carries the message. While others spend time explaining their direction, he spends time building it. That difference shifts perception. Words fade quickly, but results stay visible, and visibility creates impact. Over time, this approach strengthens his presence. People begin paying attention not to what he says, but to what he consistently does. Trust forms not through explanation, but through repetition of results. The same actions repeated over time become undeniable. That consistency replaces the need for verbal proof. People often misunderstand this phase. They believe more explanation creates more clarity, but what they don't see is that explanation can also create doubt. The more something is explained, the more it can be questioned. Action removes that possibility. It answers without needing defense. Eventually, the realization becomes clear. Words can create perception, but actions create reality. And once reality is visible, explanation becomes unnecessary because the result already says everything. He stays emotionally controlled, not reacting to justify himself. Control overrides reaction. Emotion doesn't dictate response. He refuses to explain himself from a triggered state. Most people get pulled into defending their position the moment its question tone shifts. Energy rises, words increase. It feels automatic. But he interrupts that pattern. He recognizes that reacting emotionally doesn't clarify, it weakens control. As interactions unfold, the difference becomes visible. A challenge appears, a misunderstanding is created, someone pushes for explanation. Others would respond immediately, trying to correct the situation. But he doesn't. He remains steady. No visible reaction, no urgency to defend. That absence creates space, and in that space, the pressure shifts away from him. From that point, the dynamic changes completely. Without reaction, there is nothing to escalate. Without emotional response, there is nothing to attach to. Others expect engagement, expect defense, expect explanation driven by emotion, but it doesn't come. That removes their control. Because emotional reactions create openings, and without openings, influence disappears. Over time, this control becomes consistent. He doesn't explain himself just because something feels uncomfortable. He waits. He evaluates whether a response is even necessary. If it serves no purpose, he stays silent. That silence is not avoidance, it's selection. Choosing not to react is still a decision, and that decision keeps his position stable. People often misunderstand this phase. They see calm and assume detachment or indifference. But what they are actually seeing is discipline, the ability to separate feeling from action, the strength to remain stable when others expect reaction. Eventually, the realization becomes clear. Explaining yourself emotionally gives others control over your response. But when emotion is controlled, explanation becomes intentional, not reactive. And that difference keeps his presence steady, no matter the situation. He values privacy, keeping his thoughts and plans internal. Privacy protects direction. Less exposure, more control. He stops sharing everything he thinks, everything he plans, everything he's building. Most people feel the need to talk about ideas, goals, next moves. It creates a sense of progress, but it sees the risk. The more you expose, the more you invite influence, pressure, and unnecessary attention. And attention disrupts focus. As interactions continue, the difference becomes visible. Conversations stay general. Details remain limited. When asked about future plans, he gives only what is necessary, not because he has nothing to say, but because he understands the cost of saying too much. Others expect openness, expect full access, but they don't get it. That restraint creates distance, but it also creates control. From that point, his direction becomes protected. Without external input shaping his thinking, clarity stays intact. There are no opinions to manage, no expectations to adjust to, no pressure to prove anything early. What he builds remains internal until it is ready. That timing matters, because once something is complete, it doesn't need protection anymore, it speaks for itself. Over time, this privacy strengthens his consistency. He is not distracted by how things are perceived because they are not visible yet. There is no need to maintain an image, no need to update others, no need to defend unfinished work. All energy stays directed toward progress, not perception. That difference creates efficiency. People often misunderstand this phase. They assume sharing builds connection and support. But what they don't see is how easily sharing creates interference when it happens too early. Not every idea needs to be known. Not every plan needs to be discussed. Eventually, the realization becomes clear. Privacy is not about hiding. It's about protecting. And once that protection is in place, his thoughts remain clear, his plans remain uninterrupted, and his direction remains entirely his. He recognizes that silence creates curiosity and respect. Silence draws attention. Less said, more noticed. He understands that constant expression reduces impact. Most people try to stay visible, talking more, explaining more, filling every gap to avoid being overlooked. But he sees the opposite effect. The more something is present, the less it stands out. The less something is revealed, the more it is observed. That shift changes how he communicates. As interactions unfold, the difference becomes clear. He doesn't respond to everything. He doesn't react to every comment. He allows space to exist. That space creates tension, not discomfort, but curiosity. Others begin focusing more, trying to understand what is not being said. The absence of constant explanation makes his presence more noticeable. People start paying attention not because he demands it, but because he doesn't compete for it. From that point, perception begins changing. Silence removes the need to prove. It signals confidence without stating it. When someone doesn't feel the need to explain everything, it suggests certainty. Others interpret that as control. And control creates respect. Not forced respect, but natural recognition of presence. The less he tries to influence, the more influence forms. Over time, this approach strengthens his position. Conversations become more intentional. Words carry more weight because they are not constant. Silence becomes part of communication, not absence of it. While others rely on volume to be heard, he relies on timing and restraint. That difference creates impact. People often misunderstand this phase. They assume silence means lack of input or lack of engagement. But what they are actually seeing is precision, the ability to speak only when it adds value and remain silent when it doesn't. Not everything needs a response. Not every situation requires words. Eventually, the realization becomes clear. Curiosity grows where information is limited. Respect forms where control is visible. And once silence is used intentionally, it becomes more powerful than constant communication. He avoids unnecessary debates that drain time and energy. Debates get filtered. Energy stays protected. He stops engaging in arguments that don't lead anywhere. Most people walk into a room and surfaces, but a send-them view win the exchange. It feels important in the moment, but a sees entirely different. Most debates don't create understanding. They create repetition. The same opinions, the same resistance, the same outcome. As interactions unfold, the difference becomes clear. When a conversation shifts into argument, he doesn't follow it automatically. He listens, evaluates, and decides if it's worth engaging. If the discussion has no direction, no openness, no value, he steps back. No need to prove, no need to convince. That decision removes him from cycles that consume time without producing anything. From that point, control becomes visible. Others continue debating, trying to push their perspective, expecting a response, but he doesn't give it. And without his participation, the exchange loses momentum. That absence is intentional. He understands that not every disagreement requires resolution. Some only require distance. Over time, this approach protects his focus. While others spend energy in endless discussions, he redirects that energy into progress. The same time that could be lost in argument is used to build something real. That difference creates separation. He moves forward while others stay in place, repeating the same conversations. People often misunderstand this phase. They assume avoiding debate means weakness or lack of confidence. But what they are actually seeing is discipline. The ability to recognize when engagement adds value and when it doesn't. Not every point needs to be proven. Not every opinion needs to be challenged. Eventually, the realization becomes clear. Debates that don't lead to growth only drain resources. And once that is understood, walking away is not avoidance, it is efficiency. He only explains when it serves a clear purpose, not pressure. Purpose defines explanation. Pressure gets ignored. He doesn't speak just because he's expected to. Most people explain under pressure: questions, tension, silence that feels uncomfortable. They fill the gap to reduce that pressure. But he separates the two. Just because something is asked doesn't mean it deserves an answer. Just because there is pressure doesn't mean there is purpose. As interactions unfold, the difference becomes clear. When someone pushes for an explanation, he pauses, not to avoid, but to evaluate. Will explaining improve the situation? Will it create clarity, alignment, or progress? If the answer is no, he remains silent or responds minimally. That restraint breaks the pattern. Others expect reaction, but they don't get it. And without that reaction, the pressure fades. From that point, communication becomes intentional. He speaks when it moves something forward, not when it simply satisfies curiosity. Each explanation has direction. Each word has purpose. That precision removes unnecessary dialogue. While others speak to relieve tension, he speaks to create outcome. That difference strengthens his presence. Over time, this approach builds consistency. He is not pulled into conversations he didn't choose. He doesn't justify himself to meet expectations. His responses are controlled, not reactive. That control creates clarity, not through volume, but through intention. What he says matters because it is not constant. People often misunderstand this phase. They assume silence means avoidance or uncertainty, but what they are actually seeing is selection, the ability to decide when explanation is useful and when it is not. Not every moment requires words. Not every question requires depth. Eventually, the realization becomes clear. Explanation should serve direction, not pressure. And once that boundary is established, communication becomes sharper, cleaner, and entirely under his control. Explanation isn't weakness, but uncontrolled explanation is. Most people talk to reduce pressure, to be accepted, to avoid misunderstanding. But in doing that, they lose control of their position. The Sigma male does the opposite. He speaks with intention, stays silent with confidence, and only explains when it actually moves something forward. The truth is, the more you feel the need to explain yourself, the more power you're giving away. You invite questions, doubts, and unnecessary opinions into decisions that should already be clear. But once you shift from reacting to pressure to speaking with purpose, everything changes. Your words gain weight, your silence gains meaning, and your presence becomes harder to challenge. If you want more insights into Sigma psychology, communication control, and how to build silent authority without over-explaining, make sure you subscribe to Silent Wise. And tell me in the comments, do you think explaining yourself builds respect or reduces it?